A first-class ticket isn't always a guarantee of respect. For the Reed family, it was a ticket to humiliation. At the boarding gate for their dream trip to Geneva, they were stopped by a flight attendant who saw them not as premium passengers, but as a problem. With every condescending word, she tried to erase their dignity and deny them their seats. The gate was closing. Their trip was turning into a nightmare, and no one was helping. But she made one critical mistake. She didn't realize that the man in charge of the entire multi-million-dollar aircraft, the one person with the ultimate authority to grant or deny passage, was about to walk out of the cockpit and change everything with 6 unforgettable words. The air in the John F. Kennedy International Airport's Terminal 4 was a familiar symphony of chaos. The rolling thunder of suitcases on polished floors, the staccato announcements of final boarding calls, and the low hum of 1,000 conversations blended into a white noise of transit. For the Reed family, however, it was a prelude to an extraordinary adventure. Dr. Evelyn Reed, a woman whose calm and composed demeanor was as much a part of her as her stethoscope stood with an air of quiet excitement. As one of the country's leading pediatric cardiothoracic surgeons, she was more accustomed to the sterile, high-stakes environment of an operating room than the bustling energy of an airport lounge. She was on her way to Geneva, not for a vacation, but as the keynote speaker for the World Congress of Pediatric Medicine. It was the culmination of a decade of groundbreaking research, a moment of immense professional pride. Her husband, James Reed, stood beside her, his arm resting gently on their daughter's shoulder. James was an architect, a man who built things that lasted skyscrapers, that redefined Skyskrapan, and community centers that rebuilt neighborhoods. He saw the world in lines, angles, and structures, and the proudest structure he had ever helped build was his family. His gaze was soft as he watched their 12-year-old daughter Maya. Maya was practically vibrating with excitement. Her sketchbook, a constant companion, was already filled with drawings of the Swiss Alps and Lake Geneva, imagined scenes from a country she had only read about. For her, this wasn't about a medical conference. It was about seeing the jet d'eau, eating real Swiss chocolate, and dipping her toes in waters that bordered France. She held her boarding pass in her hand like it was a golden ticket, the crisp paper bearing the magical words, "First Class." James had insisted. "Evelyn," he had said weeks ago, "you're not just attending a conference, you're headlining it. You're changing the world for children with broken hearts. We are flying there in style. No compromises." So here they were standing in the priority boarding line for Global Wings Air Flight 112 to Geneva. They looked the part of seasoned travelers, impeccably dressed in comfortable yet elegant attire, their carry-on luggage sleek and new. They were a portrait of success, a family whose journey was marked by hard work, intelligence, and grace. But as the line began to move, a subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere, a change in temperature that only they seemed to feel. It emanated from the woman standing at the gate podium, her uniform a pristine navy blue, her name tag gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Karen Miller. Karen was a senior flight attendant with 15 years of service. In her mind, she wasn't just an employee. She was a guardian of the airline's prestige, a gatekeeper of its standards. She ran the boarding process with military precision, her eyes scanning each passenger, making snap judgments with the practiced ease of a seasoned cynic. She saw a world of rule benders and chancers, and she was the thin blue line that held them back. Her gaze swept past the businessman on his phone and the elderly couple with their matching neck pillows, and then it landed on the Reed family. Her smile, which had been a thin professional veneer, tightened almost imperceptibly at the corners. She watched them approach, her eyes lingering on their designer luggage, their confident posture, their very presence in the first-class line. And in the cold, sterile calculus of her mind, a faulty equation began to form. Something to her did not add up. The Reeds were black, and in Karen Miller's biased ledger, they had been filed under the wrong column. As James stepped forward to present their passports and tickets, Karen held up a hand, a gesture that was both a halt and a dismissal. "I can help the next passengers in the premium line," she announced, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear, pointedly looking past James to the white man standing behind him. James paused, a flicker of confusion on his face. "Excuse me, I believe we're next." Karen offered him a look that was as sweet as saccharine and just as artificial. "The priority line is for first class and platinum members only, sir. The economy boarding will commence in approximately 20 minutes. James held his ground, his voice calm, and even a tone he used when dealing with difficult contractors. "I'm aware. We are flying first class. Our seats are 2A, 2B, and 2C. He held out their boarding passes. Karen took them not with the brisk efficiency she'd shown others, but with a deliberate slowness, as if handling a foreign object. She stared at the passes, then at her screen, her fingers tapping on the keyboard with exaggerated force. The silence stretched. Maya shuffled her feet, her excitement beginning to curdle into a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Evelyn placed a reassuring hand on her daughter's back, her own expression hardening into one of weary resignation. She had seen this play before, in different theaters, but with the same script. Karen hummed a sound pregnant with manufactured doubt. "There seems to be a problem. The system is showing a flag on these tickets." James frowned. "A flag? What kind of flag? I booked these directly through your website 2 months ago and confirmed them yesterday." "Sometimes," Karen said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Third-party bookings or flagged credit cards can cause a confirmation issue. The system automatically voids the seat assignment until it can be verified at the check-in counter." "But we're not at the check-in counter," Evelyn interjected, her professional patience wearing thin. "We are at the gate. We have our boarding passes, our seat numbers, and our luggage is checked. What is the specific issue?" Karen looked up, her eyes cold and impassive. "The specific issue, ma'am, is that I cannot let you board this aircraft until this flag is cleared. And unfortunately," she glanced at the clock on the wall, "the check-in counter for this flight is now closed. You'll have to step aside and wait for me to finish boarding the other passengers. Then we can see what can be done." She dismissed them with a flick of her wrist, already beckoning the next person in line. The message was clear. You are not a priority. You are a problem. And as the Reeds were forced to step out of the line, suffering the curious and pitied stares of the other passengers filing past them, a cold dread began to set in. Their dream trip was hanging by a thread, and that thread was in the hands of a woman who had judged them before they had even spoken a word. Humiliation is a slow poison. It doesn't strike like a bolt of lightning. It seeps into the bloodstream, a cold and creeping paralysis. For the Reed family, it was the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes on them as they stood against the cold plate-glass window of the terminal, ostracized from the river of passengers flowing onto the jet bridge. The man who had been behind them in line, a businessman in a wrinkled suit, hurried past with a brief apologetic shrug. An elderly woman gave Evelyn a sympathetic glance, but her husband pulled her along, muttering about not wanting to get involved. Most, however, simply stared, their faces a mixture of curiosity, impatience, and a subtle unspoken affirmation of the gate agent's authority. If there was a problem, there must be a reason. James was trying to keep his composure, but a vein throbbed at his temple. He had built a life, a career on the principles of precision integrity and facing problems head-on. To be dismissed by a bureaucratic ghost, a flag in the system, was infuriating. "This is unacceptable," he said, stepping back towards the podium. "Can you at least tell me what the flag is for?" "Let me see your screen." Karen Miller didn't even look up from scanning the next passenger's pass. "Sir, I cannot show you proprietary airline information. As I said, you need to wait. Please do not hold up the boarding process for everyone else." Her tone implied he was being selfish, a public nuisance. Evelyn, ever the strategist, took a different approach. She pulled out her phone, opened the Global Wings Air app, and brought up their reservation. The screen glowed with the confirmation, "Checked in. Seats 2A, 2B, 2C. On time." She walked calmly to the counter, holding the phone out. "Here is the airline's own application," she said, her voice steady and clear, the voice of a surgeon explaining a complex procedure. "It says we are checked in. Our digital boarding passes are right here. There is no flag. There is no issue. You are making a mistake." For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Karen's face. The physical proof was harder to dismiss than a verbal protest. But prejudice is a stubborn fortress, and she quickly reinforced her walls. She gave the phone a cursory glance. Apps can have delays. They don't always sync with the main terminal system. It was a weak, fabricated excuse, and they all knew it. "My terminal is what matters, and my terminal says you wait." Maya, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, her voice small and trembling. "Mom, are we not going to see the big fountain?" Evelyn's heart broke. This was no longer about the injustice or the inconvenience. It was about her daughter's face, which had been a canvas of pure joy just 10 minutes ago, and was now clouded with fear and confusion. She was learning a harsh lesson, one that no parent ever wants to teach, that sometimes, for no good reason, the world will decide you don't belong. Evelyn knelt, pulling her daughter into a hug. "We are going, sweetie. Don't you worry. We're just sorting out a silly computer problem." She glared at Karen over Maya's shoulder, a silent promise of a reckoning. But Karen was unmoved. She was now in her element, basking in the small kingdom of her authority. She reveled in the power to enforce rules, especially when she could invent them. In her years of service, she had developed a bitter resentment for the wealthy passengers in first class, with their entitlement and their demands. The Reeds, in her distorted view, were the ultimate imposters, people who she believed hadn't earned their place at the front of the plane, but had somehow cut the line. Denying them entry felt like restoring a natural order. "Final boarding call for Global Wings Air Flight 112 to Geneva." Her voice boomed over the speaker. "All passengers should be on board at this time." Panic began to set in. The line was gone. The gate area was nearly empty. It was just them, a couple of last-minute stragglers, and Karen, who was now beginning the process of closing the flight. "You can't be serious," James said, his voice rising in disbelief. "You're going to make us miss this flight over a non-existent issue." "I gave you your instructions, sir," Karen said smugly, picking up the paperwork to take onto the plane. "You chose not to follow them and go to the service desk. The flight is now closed. I can book you on a flight tomorrow. But there are no guarantees for first class, and there will be a significant change fee." It was the final devastating blow. She had not only blocked them, but was now blaming them for the situation she had orchestrated. She had engineered their failure and was now presenting them with the bill. James was about to lose his temper to yell to demand her name and employee number to unleash the fury that was boiling inside him. Evelyn put a hand on his arm, a silent plea to hold back. An outburst was exactly what Karen wanted. It would validate her actions in the eyes of any witnesses. It would paint them as the angry black family, the aggressors the source of the problem. They were trapped, defeated not by logic or rules, but by the unyielding wall of one woman's prejudice. The heavy door to the jet bridge was starting to swing shut. Maya was now crying softly into her mother's coat. The dream was over. Geneva, the conference, the accolades, the chocolate, the great fountain. All of it was evaporating into the recycled air of the terminal. Karen Miller stood with her hand on the door, a triumphant smirk on her face. She had won. And then a voice, calm and authoritative, cut through the tension. "Hold that door!" The voice didn't come from a passenger or another gate agent. It came from the jet bridge itself. The door, which had been closing, stopped and swung back open. A man in a crisp white pilot's uniform, with 4 gold stripes on the epaulets, stepped into the gate area. He was tall, with kind eyes, and a presence that immediately commanded the room. This was Captain Mark Peterson. He looked at Karen, then at the desolate family standing by the window. He took in the scene: the crying child, the furious father, the stoic mother, and the smug gate agent. "What's the problem here, Karen?" he asked, his tone even but with an underlying edge of steel. "Why is my flight being delayed?" Karen's smug demeanor instantly vanished, replaced by a practiced deference. "No delay, Captain Peterson. Just some passengers who had a ticketing issue and missed the boarding cutoff. I've closed the flight. We're ready to go." "A ticketing issue?" The captain repeated, his eyes now fixed on the Reeds. He took a step closer, and his brow furrowed not with suspicion, but with a dawning sense of recognition. His gaze fell upon Dr. Evelyn Reed, and his entire expression changed. The stern captain melted away, replaced by a look of profound, almost reverential astonishment. He walked past Karen as if she weren't there. He stopped directly in front of Evelyn. "Dr. Reed," he said, his voice filled with disbelief and wonder. "Is that really you?" Evelyn, startled, looked up at him. "I'm sorry. Have we met?" The pilot broke into a wide, incredulous smile. He looked from Evelyn to James, then to Maya. He let out a short, soft laugh of pure disbelief. Then he turned back to Karen, whose face was now a mask of utter confusion. Captain Peterson's smile vanished. His voice became firm, clear, and loud enough for everyone left in the vicinity to hear. "Karen, open the door and let them onto the plane." "But Captain," she stammered, "the manifest is closed. Their tickets are fine." He cut her off sharply. He then turned, and with a gesture that was both theatrical and deeply sincere, he addressed the Reeds. He looked Karen straight in the eye as he spoke, ensuring she and everyone else understood. "Please," Captain Mark Peterson said, his voice ringing with an emotion that no one could yet comprehend. "Let my owners on board. We can't be late." The word owners hung in the air of the sterile airport terminal, heavy and charged with centuries of history. Karen Miller's face went from confused to ghostly white. A nervous titter rippled through the few remaining passengers and ground crew who had witnessed the exchange. James and Evelyn Reed themselves were taken aback, their expressions a mixture of shock and utter bewilderment. Captain Peterson, seemingly oblivious to the seismic impact of his words, simply held his arm out, gesturing for the Reeds to precede him down the jet bridge. He gave Karen one last unreadable look before turning his back on her and following the family he had just rescued from travel purgatory. Dumbfounded and humiliated, Karen fumbled with the door, her hands trembling slightly. Her authority had been utterly dismantled in a matter of seconds. She who had just been the supreme ruler of Gate B24 was now nothing more than a chastened employee who had been publicly overruled. She scurried onto the plane after them, her face burning with a shame so intense it felt like a physical heat. The walk down the narrow carpeted corridor of the jet bridge was surreal. Maya had stopped crying, her small hand now clutching her father's as she stared in awe at the pilot's uniform. "What did he mean, Daddy?" she whispered. "Why did he call you his owners?" "I have no idea, sweetie," James murmured back, his eyes fixed on the captain's broad shoulders. As they stepped through the aircraft's doorway and into the hushed, exclusive quiet of the first-class cabin, the other flight attendants greeted them with practiced smiles. Captain Peterson led them directly to their seats, 2A, B, and C. "Please make yourselves comfortable," he said, his tone now warm and personal. "Dr. Reed Maya, I am so terribly sorry for what happened back there. I can't imagine how upsetting that must have been." "We're just glad to be on the plane," Evelyn said, still trying to process the turn of events. "But Captain, I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage. You know my name, but I don't believe I've ever had the pleasure of meeting you." The captain's smile was tinged with emotion. "You wouldn't remember me. We met once very briefly 5 years ago, at New York Presbyterian. It was the worst day of my life." He paused, and the jovial pilot persona fell away completely, revealing a father's vulnerability. "My daughter Chloe. She was 7, born with a congenital heart defect, a complex ventricular septal issue that other doctors called inoperable. They said we should just make her comfortable, that she wouldn't see her 8th birthday." Evelyn's expression softened. The surgeon's mind, a vast library of patient files and difficult cases, began to whir. Chloe Peterson, a 7-year-old girl, a complex VSD. The memory surfaced faint at first, then sharp and clear. "I remember," she said softly. "A left ventricular patchplasty. It was a very high-risk procedure. They called it a 1 in a million shot." Mark Peterson continued, his voice thick with the memory. "But you had developed a new technique, an experimental approach you'd been pioneering. You told my wife and me that you couldn't make promises, but you could offer a chance. We held our breath for 9 hours while you held our daughter's heart in your hands." He looked at Maya, his eyes glistening. "My Chloe is 12 years old now, same as you. She's the captain of her soccer team. She wants to be an astronaut. She lives, she breathes, she dreams. Because of you, Dr. Reed. You didn't just save her life. You gave her one." The puzzle pieces clicked into place. The strange loaded word, owners. It wasn't about servitude, it was about debt. A debt so profound it could never be repaid. "So when I say you own me," Captain Peterson explained finally, looking at James and Evelyn, "I mean it from the bottom of my soul. You own my happiness, my peace of mind, the future of my family. I owe you everything. The idea that someone on my crew under my command would treat you with anything less than the deepest respect, it's unthinkable." A profound silence settled over their row. James reached out and clasped the captain's arm. "Thank you," he said, his voice husky. "Not just for this, but for telling us." At that moment, Karen Miller appeared. She had to begin the pre-flight service, and fate had cruelly assigned her to the first-class cabin. Her face was a carefully constructed mask of professional neutrality, but her eyes couldn't hide the panic and shame. She approached their row with a tray of pre-departure drinks. "Champagne orange juice," she asked, her voice a strained whisper, refusing to make eye contact. Captain Peterson turned to her, his expression hardening again. "Karen, I'd like a word with you in the galley. Now." She flinched as if struck. "Yes, Captain." She set the tray down and followed him to the front of the plane, her back ramrod straight. The Reeds couldn't hear the conversation, but they could see the captain's rigid posture and sharp, deliberate gestures. They saw Karen nodding her face, crumbling her professional mask, slipping to reveal the terrified employee beneath. The hushed but intense exchange lasted for several minutes before the captain returned to the cockpit. A few moments later, Karen reappeared, her eyes red and puffy. She approached the Reeds, her entire demeanor changed. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, desperate humility. She stopped beside Evelyn's seat and bowed her head. "Dr. Reed, Mr. Reed," she began, her voice cracking. I want to apologize. There is no excuse for my behavior. I was unprofessional. I was wrong. I am so deeply, deeply sorry for the distress I caused your family." The apology was clearly forced by her superior, a desperate act of job preservation. Evelyn looked at her not with anger, but with a surgeon's cool diagnostic gaze. She saw a woman terrified of the consequences, but she didn't see a hint of genuine remorse for the prejudice that had fueled her actions. "Thank you for the apology," Evelyn said, simply, her tone polite but distant. There was nothing more to say. For the next 7 hours, Karen Miller served the Reed family. Every glass of champagne she poured, every gourmet meal she presented, every hot tool she offered was a fresh act of humiliation. She was a ghost at their service, her presence a constant awkward reminder of the ugliness at the gate. The Reeds, for their part, treated her with a polite professional courtesy that was in its own way more damning than any overt anger. They were denying her the release of a confrontation, forcing her to stew in the cold reality of her own misconduct. As the plane soared over the Atlantic, far above the clouds, a new drama was just beginning to unfold on the ground below. A passenger, in seat 3D, a tech blogger named Ben Carter, who had witnessed the entire gate incident, had been furiously typing on his laptop ever since. He had heard the captain's stunning owner's remark and had seen the tearful reunion. He had connected the dots. It was a story of injustice, a dramatic twist, and a powerful hero moment. It was in short, viral gold. He typed his final sentence, created a hashtag, #ownership on Flight 112, and hit publish on his popular travel blog. As the plane's Wi-Fi beamed his post out to the world, an unstoppable chain of events was set in motion. By the time Flight 112 began its descent into Geneva, the story was already exploding across the internet. Karen Miller's Karma had been cleared for takeoff, and it was flying at supersonic speed. While the Reeds slept soundly in their lie-flat beds, and Karen Miller counted the minutes until the flight of shame was over, Ben Carter's blog post was igniting a firestorm online. The headline was sensational and irresistible. "Gate Karen tries to block black family from first class, gets shut down by pilot with an epic story." The post laid out the entire scene in vivid detail. The Reed's quiet dignity, Karen's escalating hostility, the flag in the system, the crying child, and the dramatic arrival of Captain Peterson. But the centerpiece, the part that everyone seized upon, was the owner's comment and its heart-wrenching backstory. Ben's blog had a respectable following, but this story was different. It was shared by a few hundred, then a few thousand, then it was picked up by a major influencer on Twitter. From there, it detonated. The hashtag #ownership on Flight 112 began trending, followed quickly by #Gate Karen and #Global Wings Air. People were outraged by Karen's blatant racism and captivated by the poetic justice of the pilot's connection to the family. Fictionalized tweets began to fly, painting a picture for the world at activist Abby. Just read the #ownership on Flight 112 story. A black doctor saves a pilot's daughter, and years later his employee tries to stop her from boarding his plane because of her skin color. You can't make this stuff up. Hey, at Global Wings. What are you going to do about your racist staff? Travel guru Tom. I've flown 1M+ miles. The power trip of some gate agents is insane. But what Karen Miller did on Flight 112 is a fireable offense. Period. Kudos to Captain Peterson for being a class act. At Proud Parent 22. As a mum, this story hits hard. Dr. Evelyn Reed is a hero. That gate agent tried to tear down a hero in front of her child. Shame on her. Global Wings. Better make this right. The story had all the elements of a modern digital parable, a villain unsuspecting heroes, a dramatic twist, and a clear moral lesson. News outlets smelling blood in the water began scrambling. Journalists from CNN, the New York Times, and the BBC started digging. They found Dr. Reed's professional bio, highlighting her acclaimed work in pediatric cardiology. They found glowing hospital press releases from 5 years prior about the groundbreaking surgery on a pilot's daughter, Chloe Peterson. The story was verifiable. It was real. By the time the wheels of Flight 112 touched down on the tarmac in Geneva, the Global Wings Air corporate headquarters in Atlanta was in full-blown crisis mode. Alarms were blaring in the public relations department. The company's stock was taking a pre-market hit. The CEO, Jonathan Croft, had been woken by a frantic call from his head of communications. The verdict was unanimous. They had a public relations catastrophe on their hands, and they had to get ahead of it. As the passengers of Flight 112 deplaned, the Reeds were met at the end of the jet bridge, not by a customs agent, but by a flawlessly dressed woman holding a sign with their name on it. She was the head of European operations for Global Wings Air. Dr. Reed, Reed, she said, her voice a carefully calibrated mix of respect and contrition. I'm Amelia Vance. On behalf of Global Wings Air, I want to offer our most profound and sincere apologies for the experience you had at JFK. It was inexcusable. She whisked them away from the other passengers and into a private VIP lounge where champagne, Swiss chocolates, and an assortment of gourmet foods were laid out. Captain Peterson was there, having been asked to wait for them. I had no idea this was going to blow up, he said, shaking his head as he showed them the trending topics on his phone. We just wanted to get to our hotel, James said, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. Amelia Vance continued her corporate damage control script. We have, of course, arranged for a private car to take you to your hotel. Your stay has been upgraded to the presidential suite, courtesy of the airline. We have also issued a full refund for your tickets and upgraded your return flight to our Global First suite. Furthermore, the airline would like to make a substantial donation of $250,000 to the Pediatric Cardiology Wing at New York Presbyterian, in your name, Dr. Reed. The Reeds were stunned into silence. It was an overwhelming gesture, a corporate mea culpa of massive proportions. And what about Ms. Miller? Evelyn asked, her voice cutting through the pleasantries. It was the only question that mattered. Amelia's professional smile faltered for a second. Ms. Miller has been suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. I can assure you we have a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. Her actions do not reflect the values of our airline." Meanwhile, back on the plane, Karen Miller's reality was crumbling. As soon as the last passenger was off, she was met by another airline official and a member of airport security. She was not allowed to leave with the rest of the crew. She was escorted to a small, windowless office and told to surrender her employee ID and passport. "What is this? What's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. The official looked at her with cold, impersonal eyes. "You have been suspended. You are not to operate any further flights. We are booking you a flight back to New York in economy for tomorrow morning. You will be debriefed by human resources and our legal team upon your arrival." He pushed a tablet across the desk open to a news article. The headline read, "Global Wings Air in Turmoil Over Racism Allegations." Below it was a picture of her, a grainy screenshot from an airport security camera that someone had leaked. Her face twisted in a sneer as she spoke to the Reeds. The world had found her out. She wasn't an anonymous enforcer of rules anymore. She was Gate Karen, a public villain, the face of a corporate scandal. Her 15-year career evaporated in an instant. Her future, once as predictable as a flight schedule, was now a terrifying unknown void. As she sat alone in the sterile room, the weight of her actions crashed down upon her. It wasn't just about her prejudice, it was about her pride. She had been so certain of her own judgment, so confident in her authority, that she had failed to see the humanity in the family standing before her. She had judged them as unworthy, and in doing so, had rendered herself unworthy of the uniform she wore. The karma she had set in motion was just beginning its descent, and it was coming in for a very, very hard landing. The story of Flight 112 did not fade away after a single news cycle. It had staying power. Dr. Evelyn Reed became a reluctant media sensation. She was invited on morning shows not just to talk about the incident, but about her life-saving work. She handled the attention with grace, consistently redirecting the focus from her family's humiliation to the broader issues of systemic bias and the importance of pediatric health funding. The $250,000 donation from the airline was real, and it helped purchase a new state-of-the-art imaging machine for her department. In a strange twist, Karen's prejudice had inadvertently funded the saving of more children's lives. Captain Mark Peterson was also hailed as a hero. The airline, eager to salvage its image, featured him in a new internal training video about company values and doing the right thing. He and the Reeds developed a genuine friendship, their families meeting for dinner once they were all back in New York. His daughter Chloe and Maya became fast friends, bonded by the strange and dramatic story that connected their parents. For Karen Miller, however, the world grew smaller and colder. The full investigation by Global Wings Air was swift and decisive. With dozens of eyewitness accounts, Ben Carter's viral blog post, and Captain Peterson's damning testimony, the outcome was inevitable. She was terminated for gross misconduct and violation of the company's anti-discrimination policies. Losing her job was only the beginning. Her name and face were now public. She became a pariah in the airline industry. No other major carrier would touch her. The small charter companies she applied to would Google her name, and the interview would end abruptly. The career she had built, the only life she had known for 15 years, was over. Her personal life began to unravel. Friends who worked for the airline distanced themselves, afraid of being associated with her. Her social media was a toxic wasteland of hateful comments and threats. She had to delete her accounts effectively, erasing herself from the digital world. She moved out of her apartment in Queens, unable to afford the rent without a job, and went back to her childhood home in suburban New Jersey to live with her aging mother, Eleanor. Eleanor was a frail woman in her late 70s, her health as fragile as old porcelain. She knew her daughter had been fired, but Karen had fed her a sanitized version of the story, blaming it on corporate downsizing and a misunderstanding with a passenger. She couldn't bear to tell her mother the truth, that she had become a public symbol of racism, a Karen of the highest order. The days bled into a monotonous, grey existence. Karen spent her time watching daytime television, aimlessly surfing job sites for positions she knew she'd never get, and caring for her mother. The bitterness festered inside her. She didn't see her actions as racist. She saw them as a mistake, a single bad day that had been blown out of proportion by the woke mob and a pilot on a power trip. She felt she was the true victim, a casualty of cancel culture. She never once considered the fear and humiliation she had inflicted upon Maya, or the deep-seated prejudice that had guided her decisions. She was drowning in self-pity, blind to the life raft of self-reflection. 6 months after the incident, the news cameras had moved on, and the world had largely forgotten about ownership on Flight 1 and 12. But the consequences continued their silent, relentless march. The severance pay from the airline ran out. Credit card bills piled up. The weight of her new diminished life pressed down on her, suffocating her. One chilly Tuesday afternoon, her mother collapsed in the kitchen. Eleanor clutched her chest, her breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. Panic seized Karen. She called 911, her hands shaking so badly she could barely dial the numbers. The paramedics arrived and stabilized Eleanor, but the diagnosis was grim, a massive acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack. They rushed her to the best hospital in the tri-state area, the one renowned for its cardiac care, New York Presbyterian. As they wheeled Eleanor into the emergency room, doctors and nurses swarmed around her. A senior cardiologist, Dr. Evans, examined the EKG readings and the initial scans. He turned to a terrified Karen, his face grave. "Your mother's condition is extremely critical," he said. "She has a complete blockage of the left main coronary artery. We call it the widowmaker. The standard angioplasty isn't going to be enough. She needs a highly complex emergency bypass surgery. There is only one surgeon on call tonight with the specific expertise for a procedure this risky on a patient this frail." "Who is it?" Karen pleaded, her voice raw with desperation. "Whatever it takes, whoever it is, please just save her." Dr. Evans checked his pager and then looked back at her. "Her name is Dr. Reed. She's the best pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon in the country, but she also takes on the most challenging adult cases. If anyone can save your mother, it's her." The name hit Karen like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. Dr. Reed. It couldn't be. The universe couldn't be that cruel, that specific in its vengeance. It had to be a different Dr. Reed. But when a calm, confident woman in blue scrubs walked through the double doors of the ICU, a few moments later, her face kind but serious, Karen's last sliver of hope disintegrated. It was her. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed. The two women locked eyes across the brightly lit, beeping chaos of the emergency room. For a moment, the world stood still. Recognition dawned on Evelyn's face, not of malice, but of a strange, fateful symmetry. And Karen Miller, the woman who had tried to deny this doctor a seat on an airplane, now had to face her with the ultimate plea, not for a boarding pass, but for her mother's life. The karma wasn't just hard, it was surgical. The sterile environment of a hospital's cardiac intensive care unit is a world away from the chaotic energy of an airport gate. The air thick with the scent of antiseptic hums, with the quiet efficiency of life-saving machinery. Here, authority is not derived from a uniform or a title on a name tag, but from knowledge, skill, and the profound ability to hold life and death in balance. In this world, Dr. Evelyn Reed was sovereign. She reviewed Eleanor Miller's chart, her face a mask of professional focus, her eyes trained to see the faintest anomalies in a heart's rhythm, scanned the data with an intensity that blocked out everything else. The patient's age, the severity of the blockage, the low ejection fraction, it was a grim prognosis, a textbook case of a high-risk, low-probability surgery, the kind of challenge she thrived on. She had recognized Karen Miller instantly. The shock of seeing her nemesis from Flight 112, now stripped of all her self-righteous authority and reduced to a terrified daughter, was a jolt. But Evelyn compartmentalized it in a fraction of a second. In this room, Karen was not the villain from a viral video. She was the next of kin. And the woman on the gurney was not her antagonist's mother. She was her patient. That was the oath. That was the code. After conferring with the cardiology team, Evelyn approached Karen, who was huddled on a plastic chair in the family waiting area, looking small and broken under the unforgiving fluorescent lights. "Ms. Miller." Evelyn began, her voice calm and even betraying no hint of their shared history. Karen shot to her feet, her face a mess of tears and desperation. "Dr. Reed. Oh God, I didn't know." "Your mother's condition is critical," Evelyn continued, cutting through the stammering apology. "Dr. Evans has explained the situation. The procedure she needs is an off-pump coronary artery bypass. It's complex and carries significant risks, especially given her age and the trauma her heart has already sustained. But it is her only viable option." Karen wrung her hands, her knuckles white. Can you do it? Can you save her?" This was the moment. The karmic crossroads. Evelyn held all the power. She could, with a few carefully chosen words, refuse. She could cite a conflict of interest. She could say she wasn't comfortable operating under the circumstances and pass the case to a junior, less experienced surgeon. It would be a professionally acceptable, personally satisfying act of revenge. She could deliver the same verdict Karen had delivered to her family at the gate. "You are not a priority. You will have to wait. There are no guarantees." The thought flickered through her mind, a brief, dark temptation. She thought of Maya's trembling lip, of James's contained rage, of the sting of public humiliation. And then she thought of the Hippocratic Oath. She thought of Chloe Peterson's mended heart. She thought of the dozens of tiny chests she had opened repairing the most delicate of God's creations. Her purpose was not to judge souls, but to heal bodies. Her authority came from her scalpel, not her grievances. "I have reviewed your mother's case," Evelyn said, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I believe I can help her. I am recommending we proceed with the surgery immediately. I need your consent." The relief that washed over Karen was so immense, her knees buckled. She sagged against the wall, sobbing. It was not the reaction of a woman who had gotten what she wanted, but of a woman who had received a mercy she knew deep in her soul she did not deserve. "Yes," she whispered through her tears. "Please, whatever you have to do. Thank you. Dr. Reed, I am so sorry about everything." Evelyn simply handed her a clipboard with the consent forms. "The nursing staff will prep her. I'm going to scrub in. The procedure will take approximately 4 to 6 hours. Someone will update you when we're finished." She turned and walked away without another word, leaving Karen alone with her guilt and a pen. The hours that followed were the longest of Karen Miller's life. She sat in the waiting room, the muted television playing a game show that seemed to mock her with its cheerful bells and mindless laughter. Every minute stretched into an eternity. She replayed the scene at the airport gate 1,000 times in her mind, but this time she saw it through different eyes. She saw the quiet strength in Evelyn's face, the protective love in James's stance, the innocent confusion in Maya's eyes. She saw them not as statistics or stereotypes, but as a family she had tried to hurt out of a sense of misplaced superiority and a bitterness she couldn't explain. Her prejudice was not an abstract concept. It was a weapon, and she had aimed it at a woman who was at that very moment fighting to save her mother's life. The full weight of her moral bankruptcy crashed down on her. The job, the apartment, the friends, they were just the surface layers. The real loss had been to her own soul. She had become the ugly, mean-spirited person she never thought she was. Meanwhile, in the operating theatre, under the intense glare of surgical lights, Dr. Evelyn Reed was at work. Her hands, steady and sure, moved with a dancer's grace and an engineer's precision. She was surrounded by a team of nurses and anesthesiologists who moved in practiced harmony, a well-oiled machine dedicated to a single purpose. Inside that room, there was no race, no history, no Flight 112. There was only anatomy. A heart weakened and failing. A blockage that needed to be bypassed. A life hanging in the balance. For 6 hours, Evelyn worked, stitching vessels finer than thread, rerouting the very source of life around the damaged tissue. She was not just a surgeon. She was an artist, a mechanic, a miracle worker. She was everything Karen Miller had failed to see. Finally, she put down her instrument. Bypass is complete. We're getting a strong, steady rhythm. Let's close him up. A collective, quiet sigh of relief went through the room. She had done it. She had navigated the storm and brought the ship safely to shore. She stripped off her gloves and surgical gown, the immense fatigue of the marathon procedure settling over her. As she walked out of the OR, she knew the most difficult part of her night was still to come, facing the woman whose world she had just saved. The waiting room was silent and dim when Evelyn entered the garish glow of the television, now switched off. Karen was curled up in a chair, her face pale and tear-streaked, looking up with a start as the automatic doors swished open. She rose unsteadily to her feet as Evelyn approached. Evelyn was still in her blue scrubs, a surgical cap covering her hair. She looked tired, but her eyes were clear and direct. "The surgery went well," she said, her tone professional, but not unkind. "We were able to successfully bypass the blockage. Your mother is stable and has been moved to the cardiac recovery unit. The next 24 hours are critical, but her chances are significantly better now." Karen's body sagged with a final shuddering release of tension. The tears she had been holding back began to flow freely, silent streams of gratitude and shame. "Thank you," she whispered the words, inadequate, hollow. "I don't know what to say. How can I ever—" "You don't have to say anything," Evelyn said, her voice softening slightly. "I did my job. It's what I do." "No," Karen insisted, shaking her head. It was more than that. You didn't have to. After what I did, you could have said no. Anyone would have. You had every right to hate me." Here in the quiet of the near-empty hospital at 3 a.m., the final wall between them crumbled. This was no longer about a doctor and a patient's relative. It was about two people bound by a strange and powerful twist of fate. "I don't hate you, Miss Miller," Evelyn said, and she realized as she spoke the words that they were true. "I won't lie to you. What you did to my family was hurtful. It was wrong. You judged us based on nothing but the color of our skin, and you tried to abuse your authority to cause us harm. I will never forget how my daughter looked at me that day, her heart breaking because she thought her dream was over. You took something from her in that moment, an innocence that she can never get back." Each word was a precise, clean incision into Karen's conscience. "But in my line of work," Evelyn continued, her gaze drifting towards the doors of the ICU, "I can't afford to carry hate. Hate is a poison. It clouds your judgment. It makes your hands shake. When I'm in the operating room, I have to be clear. My only focus is the heart in front of me. It doesn't have a race, a religion, or a history. It's just a muscle that needs to be fixed. Your mother's heart was my patient tonight, not you." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "I didn't save your mother's life to teach you a lesson or to prove a point. I did it because it was my duty. But I do hope a lesson has been learned." Karen was openly weeping now, not out of self-pity, but out of a profound and shattering sense of humility. "It has," she choked out. "God, it has. I see that now. I was bitter. I was angry at the world, and I took it out on you. It was ugly and it was racist, and I am so, so sorry. Not just for what it cost me, but for what I did to you, to your family." It was the first time Evelyn had heard genuine remorse in her voice. Not the panicked job-saving apology on the plane, but the raw, unvarnished confession of a broken spirit. Evelyn gave a small, weary nod. Forgiveness was a complex thing. Maybe it would come one day. Maybe it wouldn't. But in its place, she could offer something else. "Go see your mother," she said. "The nurse will let you in for a few minutes. She'll be groggy, but she's out of the woods." With that, Dr. Reed turned and walked down the long, quiet corridor, her footsteps echoing softly. Her work was done. Karen stood for a long time watching her go. She had just been given back her mother's life by the woman she had wronged in the most public way. This was not the hard, punishing karma of fire and brimstone she had been expecting. It was something far more profound. It was the karma of grace. It was the crushing, humbling, life-altering weight of being saved by someone you tried to destroy. This consequence would not fade. It would live within her forever, a permanent reminder of the day she came face to face with the very best of humanity, after showcasing the very worst of it. Eleanor Miller's recovery was slow but steady. Under the meticulous care of Dr. Reed's team, she eventually returned home a living testament to the surgeon's oath. The experience had irrevocably changed Karen. The gnawing bitterness that had defined her was gone, scoured away by the crushing weight of a grace she knew she hadn't earned. Her old life was gone forever. Unable to find work in any public-facing role, she took a humble job in a warehouse and began volunteering at a food bank on weekends. It was an anonymous, quiet existence, but it was an honest one. In serving others without judgment, she slowly began to rebuild the parts of her character she had allowed to decay. She had lost her career, her status, and her pride. But in their place, she found a quiet, hard-won humility. The Reed family, meanwhile, continued to thrive their lives, a testament to the strength and dignity they had shown. Evelyn became a leading advocate for equity in healthcare. James's firm won new accolades, and Maya, inspired by her parents, decided she would one day become a human rights lawyer. The incident at JFK became a part of their story, a painful but powerful reminder of the world's injustices, but also of its capacity for profound connection. Years later, Karen would sometimes reflect on the woman in the airport who judged a family's worth at a glance. She felt no pride, only a distant pity for the person she once was. Her actions had indeed brought karma not as a swift punishment, but as a complex, life-altering lesson. Her final destination was not a place of comfort or prestige, but one of character, a journey she was finally truly undertaking. The story of the Reed family and Karen Miller is a powerful reminder that our actions, big and small, create ripples we can't always foresee. It shows how prejudice born from bitterness and ignorance can be dismantled by the stunning power of grace and professionalism. The twist of fate that placed a mother's heart in the hands of the very woman her daughter had wronged serves as the ultimate lesson. The person you belittle today may be the one you desperately need tomorrow. It's a testament to the idea that true karma isn't always about revenge. Sometimes it's about being forced to confront the best in someone else after you've shown them your worst. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next video. What did you think of Dr. Reed's decision? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.